Well, hello. I'm back. Oh, it's good to be back. Let's get an angle that we like. Ooh, that's more centered, isn't it? I don't know. How's everybody doing? Betsy, good to see you. Andrew Center is here, and Andrew already asked a question. I am so excited to talk about it. Kathy Baggett is joining us as well, and she asked me a question offline that I will respond to here. But Andrew's question is a really, really important question. First of all, can you all hear me? I think you should be able to, but Betsy, can you guys hear me and everything? Good morning, Leslie. Betsy, it's good to be back with you. Someone let me know you can hear me because this is a new setup. I've got a new camera and I've got a new, good, perfect, fantastic. Okay, there we go. Andrew's question. Andrew Center is a member of Redeemer, and he is, gosh, forget, hold on, let's look. I think you're our youngest viewer ever, Andrew, which is beautiful. I love it that you're in on this. And you asked a really important question. Andrew, apparently you're 10. I would have assumed you were 12 by now because you're just looking older every time I see you. But are you ready? Andrew asks, how can a scientist also be religious? Oh, I love this question. How can a scientist also be religious? This is a really important question. It's a really basic question in the sense of like it's not like it's not like it's like a really big question. I guess I mean like that we don't. It's so basic. It's something that we need to really understand, foundational to the way that we view the world, that we almost think like it should be obvious. And but then we never talk about it, and it's not obvious because we have this idea in our current place. Although I guess I should say it's been like this for a while. There is this strange tension between the scientific community and the religious community, and it's such a strange tension that it makes us think that somehow if you're a religious person, if you believe in God, then maybe you don't believe in science or don't believe science is real. Or if you believe in science, how could you possibly believe in, if not God, maybe, but even just like something like miracles or like Jesus doing these sort of miraculous, amazing things, or rising from the dead, or anything you can't prove, really, right? Because science taps into that thing about what's provable. This is an important question because we know that when scientific advancements and understandings have gotten in the way of inherited dogma, which is to say things that we already, the church, religious organizations believed, that the religious organizations would sometimes say, well, then that can't be true. It can't be true because it's counter to our understanding of the way things are. And nothing is more important to the religious Christian like me than God. So how can I place something above God would be the concern that people have. I've known several scientists who've become priests, and they didn't reject science to do it. I'm not a scientist, as you well know, but I also just don't. It's never been a field that I've known really well. I wasn't good at it in school. I was okay at physics because it was secretly just math. I was terrible at biology, and I was okay kind of at chemistry, but I was never really good in science. But that's not because I didn't believe it. I even went to a religious school that taught science, so that was tricky, right? But we know that there is this strange dynamic where we have people thinking that that somehow if you believe in science, you can't be religious, or if you're religious, you can't believe in science. I think this is really damaging. And by the way, this is a conversation that's been going on for a long time in religious circles. I was reading a book by Martin Luther King. It's a collection of his sermons called Strength to Love. And one of the sermons is literally all about this. And he talks about the reality that for us as people, for us as Christians, it's important for us to understand the purpose of science and the purpose of religion. What I would say for you, Andrew, and for all of us, is that these fields, these areas of the world, they serve different purposes. Now, the most basic way I can describe this, most like sort of like, if you just boil it down to the essence, I think, is that if you said, science, um, science deals with understanding how things are the way they are. Science is about the how. How is this? How did this happen? Um, how does the earth get created? Now, of course, we think religion tells us about how the earth got created, but I'm going to hold that aside for a second. Science, the work of science, helps us understand how things have come to be, how it is that what my skin's for, why I went bald. I don't know enough science to know the sad reality about that one. Science, can tell us like how to make things taste delicious, and what makes us think something is delicious, right? Science can help us like understand how brains work and all that stuff. Okay. Religion, and I'm going to speak particularly about the Christian religion because it's the one that I'm brand loyal, as you all know. It's the one I know better than the other ones. Religion has the capacity to help us understand the why and the what it means. Okay? Lisa Grubbs is here. Hi, Lisa. Welcome back. It's good to see you. Or not see you, I guess, but good to know you're here. We're talking about what it means to be religious and believe, can a scientist be religious? Was the question that was asked by our friend Andrew. And what I would say is a scientist who's interested in proving why things are what they are and using scientific method to be able to understand the how of the world may very well believe in God because for a couple of reasons. One is they've had an experience of God. They've had some kind of religious experience, and an experience that was not just a feeling or a belief or a hope, but an actual experience of the divine, and that has convinced them that it's real, that God is real, and that there's something to it. Another way, and this is what I was talking about before I got distracted by getting to say hello to Lisa, is understanding that science and religion serve different purposes in our lives. Science is not inherently moral or immoral. It's not inherently, science, good or bad. It's value neutral, right? Like, and math is very similar. 2 + 2 = 4 is neither good nor bad. It just is, right? So the scientific endeavor that helps us to understand the world, how it has came to be, and how we can live in it in ways that are I don't know, sort of physically healthy, and what our limitations are and what our abilities are. That's great, right? Religion creates a framework where we understand ourselves as people who are in relationship with the one who made us. And then religion gives us the opportunity to ask the questions, well, not just how did it come to be, but why is it like this? And the big one that I like is, well, what does it mean for us? Right? So for instance, for me, Andrew, and for all of you, for me, I believe in God, and I believe that God is love. I believe that because our Bible says so. I believe in the Christian God, and I seek to follow Jesus. I've been baptized into this faith, and I seek to follow Jesus and become part of this church, part of the body of Christ, right? And so that guiding reality for me isn't scientific, but it helps me to understand what to do with the scientific discoveries and advancements of our time. The big one during Dr. King's time was the atomic bomb. Scientists figured out how to split an atom and what would happen if you did it and how to control that. And they figured out, it was scientists that figured out how to weaponize that. Now, again, they weren't trying to figure out if that's good or bad. They were just figuring out what they were capable of doing. And Dr. King comes in and says, so now we know we can do this. That's neither good nor bad. The knowledge is present that we have the capacity to create this thing that can destroy on a level heretofore unseen, unimaginable, right? You can't fathom the destruction that's possible with this. Now, as a Christian, I follow Jesus in asking the question, what do we do with this information? What do we do with this technology? What do we do with our understanding with this advancement? And so Dr. King was talking about the difference between what we're capable of, and science helps us understand that. And to put it simply, what we should do. What should you do with what you're capable of? Andrew, you could become a black belt in karate, and that would be pretty awesome. I used to take karate. I never became a black belt. And you might have the capacity to do a special punch that would crush someone's windpipe, and you learned it for self-defense. The knowledge of that and the capacity of that is neither here nor there. It's a thing, right? And the science of it, you place their hand like this, you use this kind of force in this space, and it does this thing, right? Okay. But you're a Christian. Now, your religion, your religious connection to God, and the community of which you're a part, because that's a huge part of religion, is the community of which you're a part. Religion is not just about what you personally believe, it's about the belief of the organization, the community to which you belong. So you'd go, Phil, I learned karate, and now I know I know a scientific, and I read the science, and I know how to like do this thing where I can break a man's leg with one kick. And I'd say, cool, now let's talk about the Christian thing. Do we want to go around breaking people's legs with one kick? You'd go, oh, well, no, because Jesus teaches me to love my enemy and love my neighbor as I love myself. And I don't think it's probably a good idea for me to go around doing that. So this is the difference, right? Like the fact of we can doesn't mean we should, right? Okay, today, currently, we have a big problem, Andrew, because we have what we would call a scientific consensus that not only is the temperature, the climate, and the earth changing, it's changing in a way that will be catastrophic for people. And the scientific consensus of those who study this work understand and are saying that the reason it's doing this is because of our behavior, and because and if we want it to stop, if we can at this point, it will be up to us to change our behavior. And so what we do have is we have some religious people that's ignoring scientific evidence because it makes them uncomfortable. And they don't want to change. And let's be clear, I don't like changing. Maybe you don't like to change, right? But so we create this dynamic where we ignore or deny scientific evidence, and we reject something and make it somehow we become anti-science as religious people. It doesn't make any sense, right? So we have to, God gave us these brains, and we've said we were going to love the Lord our God with all our heart, with all our soul, and with all our mind. And one of the ways you can love God with your whole mind is using your brain as best you can to acknowledge the world as it is and what's going on around you. So even if you're not a scientist, that you want to be able to pay attention to what science says, right? And then you use your community and your understanding of God and your prayer life and your experience of God in your life to help you understand how you will respond to the things that are happening around you and the things that you're learning through the scientific endeavor. Okay, one last piece of this that I think is kind of important. And by the way, you can type and say, Phil, this doesn't make any sense, or you can ask more questions if I'm not doing a very good job of answering, and that's fine too. But there's another piece to this. There are things that happen in the Christian narrative that don't seem to make sense scientifically, okay? Jesus is my favorite example. Jesus dies, and then Jesus comes back to life. And comes back to life in this really unique way. We need to get into evolution or Genesis. Thank you, Leslie. That's really important. I almost forgot, and I kind of like hinted at it earlier, so I won't forget. Okay, let me talk about Jesus, my favorite subject, and then we'll talk about Genesis, my second favorite subject. Okay. Jesus' whole reality is apparently he's God, but he's a man, but he's also God. He dies, and then Christians say that he comes back to life. And that when he comes back to life, he's got essentially, he already had magical powers, but now he's like passing through walls and doing all sorts of things. And a lot of the things that it says Jesus did are what we would consider to be scientifically impossible. So this has led some people to say, well, those things aren't possible. Scientific minds who have been dealing with irrational and difficult religious people, of which I have been one easily. I'm an irrational and difficult religious person a lot, actually. But scientific people will be like, those things aren't scientifically possible. And religious people will oftentimes try to come up with, well, you're doubters or you're this, and then it'll become a fight. Here's what I like to think. A couple things. One is, I agree. It's not possible. That's part of the point of when Jesus does things that are not scientifically possible. That's why we go, okay, something different is happening here. The reality of Jesus doing things that aren't scientifically possible is part of the point of him doing them. He does things that others can't do, and that matters. Leslie says, and I love this, this is good. God created science, so God knows how to break science's rules and get away with it. This is a really important theological point that Leslie is making, because she is placing God at the center of the Christian narrative and saying that God created all things. God was not created by science or anything else, and therefore God is not beholden to any of the rules that God set up. And that's a really important and very traditional, dare I say orthodox, perspective on God in relation to the world. It's one with which I completely agree, by the way, Leslie. But this is an important point, that Jesus doing impossible things is not lost on the Christian person. The fact of him doing impossible things is part of the point. And he talks about that. He talks about the fact that the things that he's doing, the things that God is doing, are not humanly possible. That's actually an important point. And it's an important point for people who do live in a scientifically influenced world like we do, which is to recognize our limitations. God, in Jesus Christ, seeks, in his limitlessness, to show us our limits. Okay, that's kind of a big concept. Okay, let's take a step back. I want to talk about evolution and Genesis, but Lisa also points out differences between actual event and use of biblical myth. I think that's an interesting question. I want to talk about that a little bit with Genesis. I think there are things that are stories that are told to help us understand something about God, and then I think that there are actual events that occurred, and to say the Bible is all of one or all of the other is problematic. Okay, because to paint the Bible with a brush where I've heard people say that the Bible is literally true, and not all of the Bible was written to be literal fact. Okay, that being said, I've also heard people say the Bible isn't meant to be taken literally, and I think that's disastrous, because much of the Bible was written in a way that is telling us about events that happened, and it's framing them for us to understand them from a theological perspective. But I think that we want to do that work of understanding, or trying to understand which it is. I also think we have the capacity to be too hung up on whether something is possible and then say, if it wasn't possible, it must not have happened. And I think that's one of the most important things about the resurrection, is it's something that's not possible that happened is part of the point. So when you say, because it's not possible, it didn't happen, you create, I think you suck the blood out of a lot of the marrow of that story. And that's a problem. Right? Okay. Now, Andrew, if you're still with us and you're welcome. I love talking about this. One of the things you're going to experience, right? If you already haven't, Andrew, if people haven't already done this to you in your life, one of the things you're going to have a conversation about is, well, I believe in evolution. Leslie brought this up, but Bible people believe in creation by God. And somehow you're not allowed to believe in both. And I grew up in a tradition where you weren't allowed to believe in both. That somehow God couldn't have created the world through an evolutionary process, because that is not what is described in the creation account of Genesis. Here is the problem with that. Hold on, let me take a sip for dramatic effect. Here is the problem with that. There's not one creation account in Genesis. There's two. Heck, there's probably three. And two of them are side by side. Genesis 1 tells the story of the creation of the world. And then Genesis 2 tells a different story with different events and different details about the creation of the world. And get ready for this. The people who put those two stories side by side, are you ready for it? Weren't idiots. They did it on purpose. They weren't dumb. They knew what they were doing. And I teach this specific thing in my Bible study class, and we did Genesis 1 and 2 a few months back, and it was about a year ago now, wasn't it, Betsy? And we looked at them side by side. We spent a week on Genesis 1, a week on Genesis 2, and then we did a week just on the two of them together and how they interact. Okay, and that's a whole other class I could do, but I'm not going to do that with you today. But the fact that they put these two stories side by side is trying to tell us something. They're trying to tell us what is true about God and what is true about ourselves as God's creation. And they have a lot in common, and they have things that are distinct and different about them. Okay? The third creation story is at the beginning of the gospel according to John. It tells the creation of the world through the lens of Jesus. And it plays on the language of Genesis 1, but is a different story. These creation stories, side by side, give us different understandings of the one God and different ways to approach how God works in the world and who we are. And without all of them together, we have a smaller picture of God. We put them side by side and we get a bigger picture of God. You don't need to, in any way, shape, or form, deny the existence of an evolutionary process to believe in God. You can believe that God created the world in a way through this evolutionary process. By the way, and this is, I don't know if you knew this, but the Catholic Church, the Roman Catholic Church, the largest group of Christians in the world, currently, formally, acknowledges evolution as scientifically accurate. Now, we don't need the Roman Catholic Church to do that for it to be true. But the point is, and by the way, so do the Eastern Orthodox. If you put those two together, that's the majority of Christians in the world. They believe that this is not in conflict. Add Episcopalians and Anglicans to that. Add most Lutherans and other denominations to that. What you find out is the majority of Christians in the world hold that evolution is not in any way, shape, or form contrary to the belief in the Christian God. So the narrative that to be Christian and believe that God created the world is anti-evolutionary, or means you can't believe in evolution or can't believe in the scientific process, that narrative is a false dichotomy. It's false. You don't have to believe that. You don't have to hold on to that. Okay? Likewise, believing in an evolutionary process in no way, shape, or form means you can't believe that God created that there was a divine being that created such a thing. Right? So Genesis is really interesting, especially the first 11 chapters of Genesis. They are stories. The first 11 chapters of Genesis in particular are stories about God and creation that are true stories. They're not all factual, but they're true. They can't all be factual by definition. Genesis 1 and Genesis 2 have different details of the creation of the world. They can't both be factually accurate, but both of them can be true, because both of them can teach us something about what we believe about God and about humanity and about God's creation. This is a tough concept, Andrew. This is a tough concept if you're 10. It's a tough concept if you're 41. It's a tough concept if you're 80. Okay? That because we have thought true and fact are always exactly the same, and false and myth are always exactly the same. That is a modern idea. That is an idea that's a new idea in the history of the world. Because myth is about something, and I'm going to quote a pastor named Frederick Buechner. You probably haven't read him, but he's a guy that you may read at some point. He said, myths are things that are always true. Understanding how these things are always true about God, okay, is really important. But you also want to understand that just because something has mythical elements doesn't mean that there's no historical accuracy or historical event involved. There was a major flood, for instance, and so the Noah story, what of it is factual and what of it is mythical? That's a good question. And for us to say we know the answer perfectly would be, arrogant. It would be arrogant. But we know some things that are there are fact, and we guess that a way the story is told is in a mythical framework, and that helps us to understand what's going on there. Okay, but then also think about our gospel readings, right? So we have 4 gospel books, 4 stories about Jesus side by side. These 4 different stories about Jesus side by side have different details. Some things, in some of the stories, the same thing happens in 2 different versions, but it happens differently. Details are different, or the sequence of time is different. So you either don't notice that at all, or you believe this exact event happened 2 different ways at 2 different times, or you have to acknowledge, or you think people made a mistake when they wrote it down, right? Or you have to acknowledge that the writers were trying to do something different. They were trying to tell us something about Jesus. All 4 writers have different accounts of the crucifixion and the resurrection. They have a lot of similarities, and they place it very clearly in history. The crucifixion of Jesus is a historical event that we know happened. The way they frame that story is different. That event is different because the 4 of them are telling different things about the reality of that historical event. Christians believe that also the resurrection of Jesus is a historical event. All 4 Gospels account for it, as do all of the writings about Jesus in the New Testament. They all account for it, and they talk about eyewitnesses, and they talk about the way people's lives were changed because of their witnessing of this event. They have different ways that they describe this event, but for all of them, the fact of the event is unquestionable, right? So that can be a helpful way for us to think about the difference between fact and truth, or event and mythical language that Lisa used between I would say historical event and mythical narrative, or something like that, right? How do I feel about the dinosaurs, Leslie? I don't like them. They kill people if they were around. My son is like, I wish there were dinosaurs, and I'd be like, we'd all be running for the hills. I'm just like, thank God there's not dinosaurs. And apparently they looked more like birds than lizards. How crazy is that? Okay, how do I feel about the dinosaurs? I'm actually really glad you asked this question. And then Kathy Baggett, I haven't forgotten your question. Picture this, Leslie. Picture this. I'm in 5th grade in my religious school. And my teacher, who was roughly 12 feet tall from my perspective and 780 pounds, he looked like a tree trunk. The man was huge. Is towering over all of these little fifth graders. These little, how old was, like 10 years old, right? And he's telling some story, and he says something about, well, of course there were not actually any dinosaurs. And I raised my hand. I said, "Excuse me, Mr. Allers?" And he said, "Yes, Phil." And I said, "Did you just say there were no dinosaurs?" And he said, "Yeah." And I was like, "Why would you say that?" 10-year-old Phil, "Why would you say that?" He said, "Because there weren't." "Why would you say that there weren't any dinosaurs?" And he said, "Because they're not in the Bible." And I was like, "But they have fossils of dinosaurs and bones." And he said, "Well, sure. You've seen them, right?" And he said, "Yeah. But don't you believe God could have put those in the ground?" And I said, "Well, yeah, I believe God could do that, but why would God do that?" And he said, "To test our faith." And I said, "Well, I don't think God's that kind of a jerk." And I got in trouble, and my mom got a call. Phil was disrespectful to his teacher. I said that God was a jerk. And I actually made a point of saying I didn't think God was a jerk, because God would be a jerk if God was putting things in the ground just to see what we would do, right? But that's an actual thing that happened. Right, like Leslie said, dinosaur bones planted by Satan to confuse people, or dinosaur bones planted by God to test us. This is an abusive relationship with God. Friends, so much of what we are taught about God is a psychologically abusive relationship that gets perpetrated by church organizations and whole bodies of belief that convince you to believe that God is up there watching you, waiting for you to screw it up, and testing you like pass fail, and pass as heaven and fail as hell. And this is a deeply distorted and unhealthy view of the God of love, and it screws us all up because we think we're being constantly judged and constantly watched for what kinds of mistakes we will make. And then that's how we treat each other, and that's how we treat ourselves. Like somehow God is the mean girl in high school, or the mean boy in high school, who's watching for us to make the misstep so that God can then go, did you see what he did? Did you see how she screwed up? Oh, she's out. This is the way that we view God too often. And it's not the God that is presented to us, that's manifest in Jesus Christ. It is not the God of our scriptures. It is not the God of our tradition. And we need to reject that kind of God. Whole cloth, reject the idea of the psychologically abusive God who is staring at you saying, I'd love you more if you would just be enough. Be the right kind of person so you can go to the right place. We need to reject that God if we're going to have a real relationship with the Christian God. Okay. So back to fifth grade. So I said so I got home, and my mom said, so, principal called. I said, yeah. She said, you talked back to your teacher. I said, Mom, Mr. Allers doesn't believe there were dinosaurs. She said, what? And just to be clear, we went to the church that school was affiliated with. We were part of the place. We weren't interlopers. I was a Missouri Synod Lutheran Christian who went to a Missouri Synod Lutheran church and a Missouri Synod Lutheran school. And I don't know what the current stance of that denomination is on evolution, but when I was growing up, it purported that evolution was not real because it wasn't in the Bible. And then you take that further. I'm not saying everyone in that school didn't believe in dinosaurs, but or didn't believe dinosaurs were real, but obviously at least some of them did, right? Because it wasn't in the Bible. My mom was like, I said, Mom, Mr. Allers doesn't believe in dinosaurs. And she was like, huh? And I said, he said they weren't in the Bible, so they're not real. She was like, oh, okay. And she was like, Phil, there were dinosaurs. And I was like, yeah, I know. And she was like, okay, Mr. Allers is wrong. And I was like, right? And she's like, yeah. And she's like, but you can't talk back to your teachers like that. And I was just like, fair enough. So I didn't get in trouble for that again in that grade. I would get, anytime I'd get kicked out of class in my life, and I got kicked out of class from time to time, it was every time that I did, it was for challenging a teacher. I got kicked out of theology class in high school twice, 2 different grades, because I was too confrontational with the teacher. The thing was, clearly I was an Episcopalian this whole time and I didn't know it, right? So I had a mentor that said, you've always been an Episcopalian, you just didn't know it, because if you were arguing, if in religion class you raised your hand and said, wait a minute, you're probably an Episcopalian, right? So that's kind of my deal, and that's one way that's helped me understand my Episcopal faith. Are you asking, Lisa, did I say it already? Lutheran Church Missouri Synod. It's a very, it's a branch of Lutheranism, not one with which we are in full communion, as you might have guessed. It's very different than our tradition. It's different than the ELCA, with which the Episcopal Church has good relationship, and it's very rigid, and it's very rigid and modernist in its belief system. Generally anti-evolution, a reading of scriptures that insists that everything in there is a historical event, and believe these things about Jesus now on earth, or when you die you will burn in eternal conscious torment. Things like that I don't buy. Clearly no women in ordained leadership. Clearly no acceptance of LGBTQ plus persons as the blessings that they so clearly are. Things like that. It's not. I'll say this about the religion I grew up with. They helped me to take the Bible seriously. And they told me, they taught me, they built into me the reality of Jesus as Lord, and that Jesus' love was real, and that grace was the most important thing imaginable. So when I came to a place where I didn't feel as if the church of my upbringing was being filled with grace and following Jesus in these areas that mattered to me, I no longer could be a part of them. But I want to thank them, because they gave me the tools I needed to understand what I thought. And I would not have been able to leave them the way that I did had they not helped me understand certain things about God and given me a certain framework. So I have left that tradition, and I don't see myself as it's not like, will I ever go back or anything like that? It's like, there's no back. Like, I'm just not that, I'm this. But I hold a space of gratitude and in my heart for the things, for many of the things I was taught, some of the things I had to unlearn, but for the framework I was given as Jesus is the center of my being, of this and the whole world, and of the importance of scriptures and the importance of taking things like this seriously and working closely with scriptures to understand the world better. That's been good. And I want to say, Lisa, and I'm going to be contrarian for a minute with you, just because that's my personality. I I stay away from using the word conservative to describe a lot of these things that churches believe, because conservative suggests that they're holding on to old ways, and some of those things are old ways. But a literalistic reading of the scriptures as a historical fact is not conservative. It's new. It's only been in the last few hundred years out of 2,000 years. It's only been in the last couple hundred years that people have started to read scriptures. In the Western world, people have started to read scriptures with this kind of literalist bent. And this insistence, for instance, on inerrancy, that's a modern concept. So it's actually profoundly unconservative. And I also am apprehensive about language like conservative and liberal, because we use those words also in terms of our political affiliations or political beliefs. And I want to make sure that we understand that they can be different sometimes. That a liberal Christian reality is not inherently a liberal American or liberal political reality. And the Reverend Dr. William Barber, who is the head of the Poor People's Campaign, and the best preacher I've ever seen in person preach, has talked about the fact that, for instance, taking care of the poor and fighting for social justice is inherently conservative, because it's what the Bible is talking about and how the people understood it. So when the first Christians became Christian and followed Jesus, they all moved into shared living experiences and held their stuff in common and took care of each other. So if we were actually conservative Christians, we would live differently. And there were women in positions of leadership in the early church. So if we were actually conservative Christians, we would live differently. And so that being said, not all conservative Christianities, we're not going to reimagine that what we're doing now in what you might call progressive Christianity. I don't call it that, but some people do. Is somehow like perfectly mirroring first century Christianity. I don't buy that. I don't buy that at all. But there's some pieces of it that are really important. And it's important that we create space. If we believe in evolution, why can't our faith not evolve? And why would our religious experience not also be ever evolving, even as we hold on to certain truths and realities, right? Okay. Kathy Baggett. Wait, are we good? Are we good on this part? I could talk about this thing forever, as you've seen. Okay. Kathy Baggett asked me what I did on my summer vacation and what did I learn. Okay. Right now I'm looking at a dog. I brought him to my office. This was a terrible decision. The day after I went on vacation, we had to put my dog down. I had a dog named Django. He was 13 and a half years old. Is that right? Yeah, he was 13 and a half years old. Big boy, 80 pounds, 85 when we got him, but he was an old man and he'd lost some muscle mass. And I went on vacation on Friday, July 17th, which is my birthday, my favorite holiday. And he wasn't well, and I could tell. And he was on the living room floor and he couldn't get up, and he wasn't well, and he was peeing all over things, and it's not how he is. When he got up, he'd pee and then fall back down. It wasn't good. So I slept down there with him in the living room that night, and then the next day we took him in. And they didn't know what was wrong with him, and he wasn't getting any better. And they did the tests, and they couldn't figure anything out, and he wasn't getting any better. And he had a good long life. So we made that decision. We put our boy down. And it was like the worst I've felt in 12, 13 years, 14 years. I haven't felt like that. I devastated, crushed. I love my pup. We're very much dog people, and I'm not like the dog versus cat. It's not a fight. We just are dog people. We love having them around us. I love every dog I see. I've had dogs in my house on and off since I was a child. So So we made it 5 days without a dog in the house, and we had to get another dog. Now, we were also moving, as you know. So we got a dog the day before we moved. This was a terrible decision. But we decided that the dog that we got, we'd have for possibly 12, maybe more years. And we had 2 or 3 days of moving that were going to be awful. But we were talking about the long haul, about what this dog would be like in the Duvall's life. And we wanted this dog. So we got him. Now we have a puppy. And it's exhausting. And the kids thought it would be fun. And they're not having fun, right? Because it's actually just a big furry ball of responsibility. But we love him, and it's been really special in our house to have him around. His name is Francis. I named him after my favorite Roman Catholic, Frank Sinatra. He's beautiful. He's a coonhound mix, and he's a pup. I mean, like, he's a puppy by definition in all the ways. I think he was born on May 18th. Yep, so he's coming up on 3 months old, right? So coming up on 12 weeks. We got him when he was 8 weeks. It's crazy. And he's not a replacement. It's just, I mean, he replaces that role of family dog. But there's no replacing Django. Django is amazing. But he's going to be amazing too. Francis is going to be a great gift to our family. And we moved, as I said, and that was pretty cool. It was hard. We've had a lot of transition in the last month in our family, and we're kind of beat up. I come back to work, but I'm not really rested. But to be fair, like, I don't think anyone's rested right now. Like, we're all tired and none of us are rested. And I think that's just I think that's the state of things right now. Right. By the way, I brought a pee pad to the office, and he has since peed in 2 other places that aren't the pee pad. So I'm gonna have to clean that up. He just woke up from a nap, and we'll see how that goes. But we moved, and that was a good experience. I will, if he comes over here, I'll let you see him. Francis, he doesn't yet really come to his name though. Hey, come here. Hey, come here. What are you doing, buddy? He might be pooping in my office. Come here. Okay, he hasn't pooped yet. That's good. We're fans of that. This is Francis. Hey, look at the camera. Oh, there you are. There you go. Look at this. Look at this guy. Look at this guy. This is a good pup. So he's a good pup. I don't know if he'll hang with me. He might hang with me for a minute. He might need to get down. I'll sit here like the Godfather and just, okay. I know, he's amazing. Okay. Here's the other thing I wanted to say, Kathy, is I think some of you know, not just taking a break from this work, but I took a break for 3 weeks from social media. Lisa Clemens asked the quick question. I read that Episcopal nuns can get married. I always read they get married to God. Let's get back to that. I took a 3-week break from social media, and I know people take a break from social media, and then they go like, "Oh, I found out that my life was so much better. I looked at my family again for the first time. I looked at the stars and the sky, and I took a breath, and I went for a walk, and I found God, and now I'm back anyway because I can't help it." And they make excuses, and it's a guilty pleasure. That was not my experience. It was good to step away from socializing with people because I couldn't go on vacation, like I couldn't go to an island and chill. So I was still very much in a place. But the reality is that I like interacting with you all on social media. I like talking to you. I like posting things. I like responding to people. I like when you respond. It's a way that we stay connected in a time where connection is so difficult. So Lisa, I learned nothing about that. And here's the thing, I'm fine with that. Dear Lord, I feel like everything's supposed to be a learning experience these days. And it's like, what if something for a moment, what if it's just not a learning experience? What if it's just a thing that happened? And that's okay. It was nice to take a step away. I may do it again next year when I take vacation. That may be my rule. It's nice to remember, and there are little things like I am trying not, because I didn't look at it first thing in the morning when I woke up on my phone, and I primarily use social media on my phone. I would do other things like read the newspaper on my phone. So I'm trying to read the news first thing in the morning. But I wasn't actually on my phone less. I was playing a lot of video games on my phone because I was trying to relax in a very stressful time. But it wasn't a learning experience. It was just a thing I did. And then when it was over, I was like, cool, can't wait to see you all again. And now we're back together, and it's great. I like Instagram. I like posting pictures, and I like seeing what pictures people post. I stay connected with people from college and from high school, and I build new friendships, and those are real. They're not fake. People are like, oh, those are online. They're not real. No, those are real relationships that matter to me, and I'm grateful for them. It's no different than texting or anything else. Now, like real life, social media has people being jerks, has people including myself, I can be a jerk, creates the capacity to draw conclusions you shouldn't have drawn, creates the capacity to, it's a great format for you to say something you shouldn't have said, and to regret a lot, and it can spread false information. All those things are true. It's just that all those things are true anyway in the world. It can intensify it, and I think it makes sense to step back and take a breath and not live in it and on it. But I think social media is great. I just, the whole it's all bad. Well, it's all people, and people are disasters. We're all a bunch of messes. It just happens that we also are all very beautiful creations of God. And so we're going to screw things up, and we're going to use things for ill. Going back to what I said at the beginning, just because you can, the science is about what we can do, what's possible, and religion's about what's right for our hearts, for our lives, right? But we moved, and it was good. And Lisa, my wife's doing great. It's just she's really, I think she and I are both in the same place in terms of feeling very comfortable in the new house, and also a burden has been lifted, right? Financial burden has been lifted because, as I've said before, we downsized and we've made our lives significantly simpler in that way. But there's also less space, which is great because it's less to clean and take care of and maintain and all that. And plus, we've been waiting for this move, and now it's happened. So it's one fewer thing on the list and one fewer huge thing on the list. So getting that done is good, and she's feeling better about that. But we still have a lot to do, and we're still in the middle of a pandemic, and we're still in an election year, and so I think we're all a little on edge. Right? Yeah. That's another thing during this season. I don't want to abandon social media because I'm not. I want to be a voice for love and unity, for connection and communion. I want to be a voice for those things in a place that can be really petty and mean. We need Christians who are willing to be present and be, really be warriors for love and kindness, right? And grace and truth. Lisa, I don't know. What I would say is there are different reports for Lisa Clemens about Episcopal nuns. I don't believe that the nuns that are the nuns at the Transfiguration Center here in Cincinnati, I don't believe they can get married. But there are several different kinds of monastic orders in the Episcopal Church, and some of them do allow for their members, male or female, to get married. So yes, I believe it's possible to be an Episcopalian who is committed to monastic orders, male or female. I believe that it's possible to do that and be married, but I have not yet met someone who was. By the way, he's now asleep on my lap, with his head buried there. See, that's his head right there, buried in and it's the greatest thing in the world. actually. So that helps. It's easy to believe in love when you got a dog asleep on your lap. Tell you what. I'm going to sound like super crusadery here for a minute and probably a little bit arrogant. But I'm a little crusadery and arrogant, so you guys are used to that by now. I had a decision to make when I was younger. I knew that I believed in Jesus at some point. I'd left the church for a number of years. My divorce from the Missouri Synod Lutheran Church was just that, and I left church and did not believe I had a place in organized religion. Much like a person after a nasty, wasn't nasty, but after a difficult divorce says, well, I'll never love again, right? Like my heart's broken, and my heart had been broken by the church. My heart had been broken by organized religion, and so I didn't think I had a place. And I wasn't sure I believed in any of it. I hope you can hear me. I'm going to bring my mic closer because I'm going to sit back and hang out with my dog. All right, now look at that. Look at that. That's the stuff right there, people. I didn't think I had a place in organized religion, man. And I wasn't sure I believed in God. And I got to a point where I realized, not that I wanted to be Christian, or that I thought I should be, but that I was Christian, that I believed in this thing, that I believed in God and I believed in Jesus. But I still was very uncomfortable with the Christianity that I experienced growing up, and a lot of the Christianity that was being portrayed that we see, the loudest Christian voices in our country and our culture, right? And so I asked myself, like, what am I going to do? Am I just going to be quietly Christian in my own way and just sort of kind of do a thing? And that's okay. And my answer was no. I'm too stubborn for that, and my ego's too big. Can't have it. I'm going to go fight for Jesus. I'm going to go into a space where I make sure that there is a voice for Jesus. Not like there was the only one. I was 26, guys, and I might have been the only one that I knew. You know what I mean? Like it wasn't like I reinvented the wheel. But for a 26-year-old little white boy, I thought that I wanted more voices out there, and I knew I'd read a couple of things and then started to see it was possible. But I wanted there to be more voices. I was tired of meeting people who didn't know that you could be Christian and be accepting of LGBTQ plus peoples. I didn't know. I was tired of meeting people who didn't know you could be Christian and believe that science is real, that you could be Christian and not just be sitting around judging people. That drove me crazy. That Jesus would be considered a bad name. That people didn't want to talk about Jesus because they were worried about what that meant. That people were thought that the church equaled oppression, or indignity and disrespect and judgment. And my experience coming back into the Episcopal Church, coming back to church through the Episcopal Church, was that I found a community that was based in Jesus Christ, centered on love, talking and trying to live into grace, accepting of people in a way that made sense to me and my understanding of the world. And I was like, this is something that I want more people to know about. And so likewise, in this time we are right now, like, this is a time when people don't necessarily realize that love wins. And everyone that's on this, if you're listening and you're a part of this thing with us, we have a responsibility. We have a responsibility to make sure that we represent the powerful love of God in the world. You want to get down? Oh yeah, go pee somewhere on my rug, and because I'm being recorded, I won't cuss and scream. I'll just act like I'm totally cool with it. He's chasing his tail. So likewise with social media, like right now, guys, we've got to be voices for love. My friends, we've got to be voices for honesty and accountability, for integrity, and truth, and for grace, for faithfulness to God, which looks like forgiveness and justice. And we've got to do that work. think that's a good note to end on. I felt a little rambly today, but I'm really grateful for you all. Thanks. It's good to be back. Gillian Welch put out not one, but 2 albums during this pandemic. She and her partner, David Rawlings. One is she and David recording songs from home that are all covers of other people's songs, including 2 different Dylan songs. Amazing. Oh, so good. It's called All the Good Times Are Past and Gone. And then the second one is actually just unreleased previously recorded stuff from back in like 2002, I think. And it's all phenomenal as well. So that I've been digging into that. And I've been listening to a bunch of old stuff. I keep telling you about Ella Fitzgerald, but so my Spotify is starting to figure me out. And so there's this Louis Armstrong, Oscar Peterson album. Oscar Peterson plays piano, and Louis Armstrong plays trumpet and sings. And it's just the 2 of them, and it's really good. It's really good. So check that out, Louis Armstrong and Oscar Peterson. And what else have I been listening to? Let's take it here, because you should know this is super important. Because you need some recommendations, people. You need my help on music, right? And because I named my dog after Frank Sinatra, I have been listening to just an absolute ton of Frank Sinatra. Been digging back into Dwight Yoakam. Oh, and there's a new Taylor Swift album, and it's lovely and fantastic. And I don't know her super well. I'll be honest about that. But I've got a couple of her albums. I've got one of her albums at home, and I've heard a couple of the other ones. And this new album, it's quite good. So there, Taylor Swift gets the Phil Duvall seal of approval, which is horrifying to some of you and validating for others. But such is life. What would we be if we were not disappointments to one another? And Alanis Morissette has a new album. I haven't heard it yet. And Leslie, 2 different people have told me to listen. So I will listen to that today. And we will report back next week. Next week, same time, I hope you all will join us. I hope you will invite others. I hope you will have questions to ask. Send me the questions ahead of time so I can prepare, or ask me right in the spot and we'll see what I can do. Lisa and Betsy and Leslie and Kathy and Andrew and anyone else that's with us, thank you for being here. Thank you for being a part of this. We'll keep it going. It's fun for me to talk at you for an hour, and I love you all and love that we get to be together. So we'll see you next week, same time, same channel. Bye.